What's good, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Who Needs a Classroom? I'm your host, C.Shreve, the professor. Brought the class outside today because it's a beautiful day in North Carolina. So, wanted to talk to you about a couple simple topics that have lots of relevance for life and current events, especially. I want to talk about compassion and empathy, and especially them versus division and fear. And we see this play out regularly in current events, which is a lot of times how I like to bring ideas alive and give them current relevance. So I've heard and seen in discussions online and heard amongst conversations, people say something to the effect of they want things to get back to normal, they want to get back to the way things used to be, they want, or they say, how did things get so bad? How did we get here? Something like that. And so I can only hit so many topics in one lecture bubble or little pocket. And so I would refer you to some Google terms or some search terms. And so, think of slavery, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, which is the modern Jim Crow. Search for Emmett Till, Huey Newton, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, Rodney King. Search for redlining. Search for voter suppression. Search for these concepts that kind of are a backlog to this conversation and will inform you and help you moving forward to know what you're discussing, so that when you say, well, I see why folks are protesting, but I got a problem with looting. Maybe have a more nuanced understanding of an issue like that. So search some of those terms. It'll help you to have just more foundation in these conversations. So in light of George Floyd, in light of the incredibly long history of violence along racial lines in America, we arrive at Black Lives Matter, at a movement of protests around the world, as we've seen, that are really unparalleled in terms of scope and in terms of momentum. And so we want that momentum to keep going from a policy perspective. I come at this from a public health or health promotion perspective. And so we want policy changes that affect policing. So you see folks say defund the police, which sounds like a really, revolutionary statement until you realize education's been defunded for years. And so it's not as revolutionary when you frame it that way. So that's how we got here, is a lot of those dovetailing issues and perspectives. So I want to frame a lot of this from a compassion and empathy perspective. So what is compassion? So very simply, compassion could be looked at as my ability to recognize suffering in another, seeing that someone is hurt, seeing that someone is going through something, and being able to recognize that. Now, empathy takes it a step further and allows me to put myself in their shoes and say, I see you suffering, and if I was suffering, here's some things that I might want done, or how the world might shift if I change perspectives, which is essentially a cognitive conceptual blend via kind of metaphorical thinking, which I'll come back around to. And it's really kind of an interesting thing our brain does with empathy, and allows us to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and say, I'm not that person, but if I was, next step type thing. So when we look at compassion, this idea of being able to recognize suffering in another, and then taking the step further with empathy to fully relate to it in terms of what if I were them. When we amplify aspects of this, we can see that it can play out in some interesting ways. Extreme compassion, extreme levels of empathy. Let's say when someone will risk their life for another human being. Sometimes this happens without thinking, almost as a reflex. A parent will see their child in the street and just run in front of a car and grab them and help rescue them. That could also be a stranger. This has happened with strangers before. A human sees another human in danger, forgets thinking about themselves for a moment completely, and saves this other human, despite the harm that they may be then subjected to or are now exposed to. And that runs very counterintuitive to how we think of our brains and as humans. Survival first, of self-preservation, of, I want this organism to survive. And so when Schopenhauer tried to figure this out and tried to say, what does that mean? Why would a human do that? Why would a human forget themselves and act in this other human's best interest to save them? Why would a fireman do what they do, or a firefighter do what they do? Why would, in combat, why would a soldier jump in front of a hand grenade for this other soldier? Why do those things happen? Why are people putting their lives on the shelf to save this other human? And Schopenhauer said it's because in those moments, the human is recognizing that they are not separate, that is the same, that you have a sameness with that other being, and you're part of the same universe, part of the same greater organism. And so in that moment, it's almost the same as self-preservation. It is, this human needs my help, I will save that human. And so that idea explains extreme levels of compassion. And so when folks sometimes say, why would they stand the front lines of the protest and put themselves in harm's way? Compassion, empathy, the ability to put on someone else's shoes conceptually and say how things might be differently. How could you view them? How might it play out at the street level or in day-to-day interaction? So I wanted to oppose compassion and empathy with division and fear, because that's part of how we got here, the division and fear mongering that happens in this country. And so when we look up something like redlining, when we look up these historical contexts for soldiers coming back from World War II and not being able to get access to the same suburban housing as their same peers in that same platoon because of the color of their skin. When we look at that, that's division. Obviously, we're dividing. We're putting families here, we're creating division. And anytime we do an us versus them, we create this othering scenario, we create inequality. Anytime that happens, we create these boundaries, these battles that can occur. And politicians and those in the ruling class are excellent at manipulating these and magnifying them and pitting one group against another. And that's division. And then making this group fear that group. They're the bad guys. They're taking your jobs. They sent your jobs overseas. Things like that are putting a target, creating something to throw darts at, creating a bad guy. You should be mad, and he's the guy to be mad at. That type of thing. And so there's been a lot of that strategically over the centuries, really, in America to create a system that we tend to think and paint, maybe British society as this class-based society, but we come from that. And we perpetuated our own version of class and race in America, that we like to act like we're above and everybody can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. But it's much more difficult when intergenerational wealth has no chance of being started or passed down via social mechanisms that are insidious and nefarious, to say the least. So when we say us versus them, in the Cold War, when we said the grizzly bear with its fangs out and its claws for Russia, when we tend to look at ourselves as this bald eagle, this hawk, this war that has missiles in one hand, but hopefully olive branch in the other, then we said about this domino effect of fear. Because what is fear? It's going to come from this fight or flight place inside of us. And so when somebody makes you feel afraid, they stimulate you to literally want to fight something or to flee. It stimulates the system of acetylcholine and this incredible chemical cascade in your body and autonomic nervous system response of higher heart rate, blood pressure, sweating, shutting down digestion, the whole nine of fight or flight, but then applied to your social structure. So when the guy up top says, you should be mad and you should be afraid that things are never going to be back to how they were, and the next thing you know, you're looking for something to blame or something to run to, and ideologies tend to try to scratch those itches. So that is involved with how we got here. The imagery that we use to say someone is this beast, it's this bad guy, it's this dark image of a criminal, the way we paint with a brush over an entire nuanced understanding of a culture or of an entire country or of a nationality, the way that we then make that the boogeyman, make that the bad guy. Using our imagery, using our terminology. Those are ways in which we create other. They don't know, they no longer deserve your compassion or your empathy because they're different. When we do that, we create a scenario where we are no longer held to the same human standards because they no longer deserve our compassion. And that's where we get into the incredibly disgusting history of humanity and its wars and the many crusades in different names of liberation, of freedom, of a perpetuation of an old power structure or of a new one that's going to turn it on its head. But in many cases, in most cases, not really reflecting the ground level reality of the humans who have to live it out. You know, the folks, you know, who try to make a living and trying to eke out as close to near happiness as they can. And so at that cost, this battle of divisions is fought. So I get frustrated when I think of too many things conceptually and think, okay, well, that sounds all well and good, but what do I do about it? How do I, you know, get out there and make change? You can get out there and make change in numerous ways. You can change by the way you treat your family, by the way you raise your children, by the way you talk to your father, by the way you interact with your peers at work. You can get on the front lines. You can provide medical support. You can bring water. You can donate to bailout funds. There are numerous ways to help. Many of them start with compassion and empathy. You can live this out very easily. When situations arise, you can assess, is this a situation where I'm creating an enemy, a boundary, a division? Am I utilizing, is fear being used against me to propel me towards an action that I may or may not fully agree with? Or am I utilizing something more varied in its perspective, something more compassionate, something more reflective of the other humans who are looking at things from their perspective? The more perspectives that we can entertain in our own mind and utilize, the more that we can have to share with the world. So there's an actual ground level reality. When you move through the world, you can see these opportunities to utilize compassion, or if you are being kind of fear-mongered into making a choice that's more reflexive or reactive. So when you put together your mental construction of where you are in this universe and the way you want to move through it, please utilize empathy. Empathy is an amazing blend of saying, I'm here now, but I can imagine if I were here now in a different space, and how would I look at this space and time from that perspective? And it's in that interaction of how is that the same and different from now, that the information can occur, the exchange, the blend, where I can say, okay, I'm not putting those shoes on, I can't fully put them on and can't fully be a black man in America, but I have black friends and I have the ability to imagine if I were them and their families and imagine the conversations I would have had to have with my 9-year-old son. And that can inform who I am now and inform the way I talk to him now. And so that mental construction of that blend of metaphor of what if I were different, how would I move through the world as a black female? And think about that for a second, have that inform the way I do move through the world. And that conceptual blend, if I can take that from numerous perspectives, can result in me moving forward and helping the world to move forward in a different way. And so empathy and compassion really becomes something that should be a tenet of the way you look through life. I'll leave you with this, and maybe this will generate some interaction in the comments and whatnot online. Please subscribe and all that, of course. How do you teach empathy? I think a lot of people learn it through nurture. The way they were raised, their mother, their father, the people who raised them, their grandparents, nurtured them in a way that was compassionate, showed them how to share, showed them how to look out for others, explained things to them. They were taught that. But what happens if they missed it? What happens for the folks who receive trauma, abuse, lack of trust, lack of connection with others, and they've been fight or flight for their whole life, and they have a very difficult time in connecting with others and in seeing others' perspectives? how do we then teach that person empathy? So I think in the first case, we're teaching it or we're living it. But in the second case, when the experience is different, how do we then create that? So hopefully I'm doing some of that and stimulating some of these ideas. Hopefully some conversation will occur among you and yours about ways to be more compassionate, more empathetic, as ways to overcome the division and the fear that has been sown throughout our experience in America and throughout many of the current events that we are experiencing now. Thank you for your time. Again, my name is C.Shreve. I try to profess a little bit. I got some raps online. Y'all can check those out. I got some new music coming too. So thank y'all kindly. Enjoy your day. Take care of your loved ones. Look out for the world. You can make a difference out there. Who needs a classroom? Everybody, right?